My mother-in-law poured something into my drink when she thought I wasn't looking. "Special cocktail for my favorite son-in-law," she said with a smile. I thanked her, then quietly switched glasses with her husband. 45 minutes later, he was violently sick, and she realized her mistake. "My name is Julian Mercer, 32 years old, independent photographer based in Asheville, North Carolina. I've built my business from nothing: weddings, wildlife, magazine spreads. The kind of work that pays well if you're good at it, and I am. But to my in-laws, especially Diane, what I do has never been enough." "How's the little photography hobby?" Gerald would ask at family dinners, not even trying to hide his disdain. He was an investment banker, the kind of man who measured success in stock portfolios and country club memberships. Every Sunday dinner was the same routine: Diane fussing over our daughter Haley while Gerald interrogated me about my finances. I'd been shooting a wildlife assignment in Montana all week, trudging through knee-deep snow to photograph bison for National Geographic. I was exhausted, but Haley insisted we couldn't miss her mother's birthday dinner. "Just a couple hours," she promised. I should have listened to that knot in my stomach when Diane cornered me in the kitchen. The way her eyes darted around before she handed me that drink. The slight tremor in her fingers as she said those words. Something wasn't right. Haley and I met 6 years ago at an art exhibition where my work was featured. She was finishing her master's in environmental science, and I was just starting to make a name for myself. We connected instantly. She understood my need to capture the world through a lens, and I admired her passion for protecting it. Her parents were another story entirely. From our first meeting, Gerald made it clear he'd expected someone different for his daughter. Someone with a desk job, a retirement plan, a company car, someone exactly like him. Diane was subtler. She'd praise my photos while asking when I planned to settle into something stable. For years, I tried to win them over. I'd bring expensive wine to dinners, show them published work, mention high-profile clients. Nothing changed their perception that I was just passing through their daughter's life, a phase she'd outgrow. Last Christmas, I overheard Diane on the phone. "Haley could have married Thomas, you know. Orthopedic surgeon, family money. But she chose the creative one." The way she paused before creative made it sound like a disease. Gerald was more direct. When Haley and I announced we were trying for a baby, he pulled me aside. "Children are expensive, son. Maybe think about real employment before bringing one into the world." I never told Haley these things. She loved her parents despite their flaws, and I didn't want to force her to choose sides. So I smiled, shook Gerald's hand firmly at every visit, complimented Diane's cooking, and kept my thoughts to myself. But there were signs I should have taken more seriously. The way Diane would accidentally exclude me from family photos. How she'd ask Haley to help in the kitchen whenever I talked about a successful project. The time Gerald suggested therapy for Haley's impulsive decisions while looking directly at me. I ignored it all, thinking time would eventually bring acceptance. I was wrong. The Friday of Diane's birthday dinner, I returned from Montana with windburned cheeks and a memory card full of images that would pay our mortgage for 3 months. I was bone-tired but showered, put on a button-down shirt, and drove to their colonial-style home in the expensive part of town. Dinner started normally. Gerald bragged about a recent deal. Diane fussed over the table settings. Haley's brother Owen and his wife Vanessa made polite conversation. I nursed a beer and counted the minutes until we could leave. After the main course, Diane announced she'd made her famous sangria for dessert. She disappeared into the kitchen, and I offered to help carry glasses. That's when I saw it. She had 2 glasses separate from the others. As I entered, she quickly added something from a small vial into one of them. It wasn't a garnish or flavor enhancer. It was colorless, odorless, and she tucked the vial away the moment she heard my footsteps. "Oh, Julian, I've got this," she said too brightly. "This one's for you. Special recipe for my favorite son-in-law. My throat tightened. The glass had a barely perceptible film floating on top, catching the light just wrong. Every instinct I'd developed as a photographer, the ability to notice details others missed, was screaming danger. "Let me help you carry these," I said, taking both glasses she'd prepared. In the dining room, Gerald was checking his phone, barely looking up when I approached. "Sangria, sir," I said, placing the tampered glass in front of him instead of taking it myself. I watched him drink, making an excuse about preferring water with my dessert. 45 minutes later, Gerald was pale, sweating, and rushing to the bathroom. The violent sounds of his illness echoed through the house. Diane's face drained of color when she realized what had happened. Her eyes met mine across the table, and in that moment I knew two things with absolute certainty. My mother-in-law had tried to poison me, and she knew that I knew. I didn't react, didn't confront her, just ate my chocolate cake while Haley rushed to check on her father. In the chaos that followed, Gerald insisting it must have been food poisoning, Diane stammering about bad shellfish, I quietly pocketed the untouched glass meant for me. Something had shifted inside me. The anger I felt wasn't hot or explosive. It was cold, deliberate. I wasn't just going to let this go, but I wasn't going to fight their way either. I was going to make them face exactly who they were. The Monday after the dinner, I took the glass to Jason, a former client who ran a toxicology lab. "Personal or professional?" he asked when I explained what I needed. "Family matter," I replied. 3 days later, he called. "Julian, there were benzodiazepines in that drink, nothing lethal, but enough to knock someone out for hours, maybe cause some memory loss. Where did you get this?" I thanked him and asked for a written report. I didn't answer his question. That night, I told Haley I wanted to skip Sunday dinner for a while. Said I needed to focus on an upcoming exhibition. She was disappointed, but understanding. I didn't tell her about the test results, not yet. I needed more information first. Over the next 2 weeks, I did some digging. Diane had prescriptions for Xanax from 3 different doctors. She'd been doubling and tripling her doses for years. There were also rumors about her in town, strange behavior at a neighbor's party, accusations of stealing jewelry at her country club, stories her family had worked hard to bury. I compiled everything and waited for my moment. It came when Haley mentioned her mother needed photos for a social media profile. She specifically asked if you would take them. Haley said, surprised by the request. I agreed. The following Saturday, I arrived at their house alone, camera bag in one hand, a sealed envelope in the other. Diane was waiting, dressed expensively, makeup perfect. Gerald was at the office, she explained. "Before we start," I said quietly, "I thought you might want to see this." I handed her the envelope containing the toxicology report along with the printouts of her multiple prescriptions. Her hands trembled as she read. "This is absurd," she whispered. "I would never—" "We both know what happened," I cut her off. "What I don't know is why." Her face hardened. "You're not good enough for my daughter. You never will be. A man should provide security, not pictures." "And drugging your daughter's husband provides security?" I kept my voice level. "It wasn't going to hurt you," she snapped. "Just make you sick. Make you miss that ridiculous gallery opening you've been talking about for months. Show Haley that you're unreliable." I let that sink in. "Here's what happens next," I said finally. "You're going to tell Gerald what you did, then you're both going to start treating me with respect. Not because you've suddenly changed your minds about me, but because the alternative is Haley finding out exactly who her parents are." Diane laughed, but it sounded hollow. "She'll never believe you over us." I picked up my camera bag. "Maybe not, but she'll believe the lab report, and the prescription records, and the neighbors you've alienated." I paused. "Are you willing to bet your relationship with your daughter on that?" I left without taking a single photo. That night, Diane called Haley in tears, claiming I'd behaved inappropriately during our session. Said I'd been hostile and threatening. When Haley confronted me, I couldn't hide the truth anymore. I showed her everything. The lab report, the prescriptions, even text messages from her mother that had become increasingly hostile over the years. My mother wouldn't do this, she kept saying, but her voice lacked conviction. The next day, she confronted her parents. I wasn't there, but when she returned home, her eyes were red from crying. "My father says it's all a misunderstanding," she said quietly, "that you're trying to drive a wedge between us because you're insecure about your career." I just nodded. I'd expected this. "What do you think?" I asked. She didn't answer, just crawled into bed and turned away from me. For 2 weeks, Haley barely spoke to me. She went to her parents' house alone, came back with red eyes and new doubt. I threw myself into work, spending long hours in my studio, waiting for the storm to pass. Then a package arrived for me. No return address, just my name, scrawled across the top in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a USB drive and a note. "You should see this. Vanessa, Owen's wife." The drive contained video files, home security footage from Gerald and Diane's house. The timestamps showed the night of the dinner. There was Diane in the kitchen, clearly adding something to a drink. There was me entering, taking the glasses. There was Gerald drinking from the tampered glass. But there was more footage from after we'd left. Diane screaming at Gerald, blaming him for drinking from the wrong glass. Gerald yelling back, "This isn't the first time you've done something like this." I watched the footage 3 times, trying to process what I was seeing. Not just confirmation of Diane's actions, but evidence of a pattern. Evidence that Gerald knew. The next file was from 2 days after the dinner. Diane and Gerald arguing in their living room about me. "He knows what you did," Gerald said. "So what?" Diane replied. "It's his word against mine. Haley will never choose him over family, and if she does, then she's not the daughter I raised." She paused, then said coldly, "Don't worry. I've already started talking to her about their marriage problems, planting seeds. By the time I'm done, she'll be filing for divorce and thinking it was her idea." I shut my laptop, hands shaking. This wasn't just about me. This was a systematic effort to control Haley's life, to isolate her from anyone who didn't fit their vision. And they'd been doing it for years. I called Vanessa immediately. "Why did you send this to me?" "Because they did the same thing to me when I married Owen," she said quietly. "They tried to break us up for 2 years, said I wasn't good enough. It almost worked. Why didn't you tell us?" "Owen doesn't know," she admitted. "He worships his father, believes everything he says. I've tried to tell him, but he thinks I'm paranoid. I just couldn't watch them do it to someone else." The next day, I showed Haley the security footage. We sat in our living room watching her parents plot to destroy our marriage, listening to her mother's cold calculation about manipulating her own daughter. When it was over, Haley turned to me with tears streaming down her face. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I needed you to see for yourself," I said. "All of it. Not just what they did to me, but what they've been doing to you your entire life." That evening, we confronted her parents together. I brought my laptop and showed them I had copies of everything. The footage, the lab reports, the prescription records. Gerald tried to bluster, claiming the videos were edited, that I was trying to frame them. But Diane's face had gone white. She knew exactly what was on those recordings. "You drugged my husband," Haley said, her voice steady despite her tears. "You tried to destroy my marriage. You manipulated me into doubting the man I love." "We were protecting you," Diane said weakly. "From what? From someone who loves me? From someone who's built a successful career doing what he's passionate about?" "You weren't protecting me. You were controlling me." Haley stood up. "I love you both. You're my parents. But what you've done is unforgivable. You don't get to control my life anymore." As we prepared to leave, I handed Gerald a USB drive. "This contains everything," I said. "The footage, the emails, the testimonies. It's yours to keep." "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked suspiciously. "It means I'm not going to ruin your reputation by sharing this with anyone else. That would hurt Haley, and I would never do that." I paused. "But if you ever try to interfere in our marriage again, if you ever try to manipulate Haley or speak against me, copies will go to every member of your country club, your business partners, and your precious social circle." For the first time since I'd met him, Gerald looked at me with something resembling respect. 6 months passed. Haley and Owen began therapy to work through the damage their parents had caused. Diane and Gerald kept their distance, sending occasional texts but respecting the boundaries we'd established. Then, over the holidays, they invited us all to dinner. "A fresh start," the invitation read. Haley wanted to go. "They're still my parents," she said, "and they're trying." I agreed, but I wasn't naive enough to believe they'd changed. When we arrived, everything seemed normal. Diane had prepared a feast. Gerald was charming, asking about my latest projects with what appeared to be genuine interest. After dinner, Gerald invited me into his study. "I have a proposition for you," he said, pouring himself a scotch. "I've been thinking about your career. Photography is, well, it's been good to you. But have you considered diversifying? I could bring you into my firm. Junior partner track, the salary would be substantial." I took the glass he offered, but didn't drink. "Why would you do that?" "Your family," he said smoothly, "and I respect how you handled the unpleasantness. You protected my daughter while standing your ground. That's what a real man does." I set the glass down untouched. "I appreciate the offer, but no." His smile tightened. "Julian, be reasonable. This is an olive branch, a way for us to move forward." "No," I repeated, "it's another attempt at control. You can't buy me, Gerald, and you can't stand the fact that Haley loves me exactly as I am." "Don't be a fool," he hissed, dropping the facade. "Everyone has a price. I always knew you married Haley for financial reasons." I stood up. "That's where you're wrong, and that's why you'll never understand your daughter." I walked back to the dining room where Diane was showing Haley photo albums. "Look at these," she was saying. "You were so happy when you lived at home." Haley caught my eye across the room. She could see from my expression that something had happened. I gave a slight nod and she stood up. "Mom, Dad," she announced clearly, "I have something to tell you. We're having a baby. Julian and I'm 3 months pregnant." The shock on their faces was genuine. Diane recovered first, rushing to embrace her daughter with tears in her eyes. Gerald approached more slowly, glancing between Haley and me. "Congratulations," he said stiffly. "Thank you," I replied. Then, lowering my voice so only he could hear, "This child will never be a pawn in your games. I promise you that." His face hardened, but he nodded once. He understood the message. As we drove home that night, Haley squeezed my hand. "They'll never change, will they?" "No," I said honestly, "but they'll have to accept that we have." 3 weeks later, a certified letter arrived from Gerald's attorney. Inside was a deed to our house, which we'd been renting, and legal documents establishing a trust fund for our unborn child. There was no note, no conditions, no strings attached, just the transfer of assets, clean and irrevocable. It wasn't an apology. Gerald wasn't capable of that. But it was an acknowledgement, perhaps the only one he could give, that we had won. Our daughter was born in summer. We named her Eliza, after my grandmother. When Diane and Gerald came to the hospital, they brought gifts but maintained a respectful distance. They cooed over the baby, took photos, and left without trying to give us parenting advice or financial lectures. Months passed. Our relationship with them settled into something resembling normalcy. They never apologized for what they'd done, but they stopped trying to control Haley's life or undermine my career. One evening, as I was editing photos in my studio, Haley came in carrying Eliza. "My mother called," she said. "She wants us to come for Christmas." I looked up from my computer. "What do you want to do?" "I think we should go," she replied, "but with conditions. We stay at a hotel, not their house. We leave when we want to leave. No unsupervised time with Eliza." I nodded. "Sounds reasonable." She sat down beside me, bouncing the baby gently. "You know, I used to think success meant making my parents happy, getting their approval, meeting their expectations." She looked down at our daughter, then back at me. "Now I know it's about making choices I can be proud of, standing by the people I love." 2 weeks before Christmas, a large envelope arrived from Gerald. Inside was a glossy brochure for his company's annual report. My photographs were featured throughout. Landscapes, portraits, architectural shots. The work I'd done on my own terms without his interference. There was a brief note. "Hired the best photographer I know. Thought you'd want a copy." It wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation. It was something else. Respect, perhaps. The acknowledgement that I was successful on my own terms, not his. I didn't call to thank him. We both understood this wasn't about gratitude, it was about recognizing the new reality, the new boundaries. That spring, I opened my own gallery in downtown Asheville. At the grand opening, Haley stood beside me, Eliza on her hip. My parents flew in from Oregon, friends and clients filled the space, admiring the images I'd captured over the years. Gerald and Diane came too. They didn't stay long. Diane held Eliza briefly under Haley's watchful eye. Gerald shook my hand, nodded at the photographs with genuine approval, and left without making any suggestions about how I should run my business. As we locked up that night, Haley asked, "Do you think they've changed?" I considered the question carefully. "No," I said finally, "but they've accepted that they can't change us. And sometimes that's enough." Later, as we sat on our porch watching the stars come out over the mountains, Eliza asleep in her crib upstairs, I realized something I'd never fully articulated before. I hadn't won by playing Gerald and Diane's game, I'd won by refusing to play it at all. I'd stood my ground, protected what mattered, and built my life according to my own definition of success. Not with schemes or manipulation, but with honesty and quiet persistence. In the end, that was the most satisfying revenge of all, living well on my own terms with the family I loved beside me.